In the last video, I showed you how to use your calculator, and you may have been wondering, well, how do I do cosecant, secant, and cotangent? Because if I go look at my calculator here, I can see those three, sine, cosine, tangent, right on the front, but what about the others? So, um, kind of like how I taught you about, common log and natural log, and why, it didn't have the other log functions of base. Well, really, there's a simple way between, of converting between logs of different bases back to common log or the natural log via the change of base formula. But the thing about sine, cosine, tangent, the reason those aren't on your calculator is because those are just, looking at the definition, they're direct reciprocals, as well as on the packet. You can basically use the reciprocal, what we call the reciprocal identities to evaluate them instead. So say I wanted to take, well, what's the secant of something? You would just type in 1 divided by cosine of that to get it instead. Like say I wanted to check my answer over here, which was that secant of 4 pi over 3 is negative 2. I could do that by doing 1 divided by the cosine of 4 pi over 3. Check it out. 1 divided by cosine 4 pi divided by 3. And cool, check, neat, moving on. Also on the packet, there's a lot of practice here. So if you did print it out, I recommend just practicing more. Try them out yourself. And if you have trouble, an email, comment, come to our Zoom meetings, whatever. Because this is not easy. Especially there's a lot, right? There's been like an hour of videos already getting here. Once you get it, it's pretty simple, but there's a lot of things coming together. Also, with doing coterminal in evaluating, like say for example, I want to figure out, well, what's the cosine of 10 pi over 3. One obvious issue that I've run into is 10 pi over 3 is not on my table here. It's not on my unit circle. What to do? So we can use the idea of coterminality to change the location of t by subtracting 2 pi. Um, and what I could do is if I subtracted 2 pi, that would be minus 6 pi over 3. That would give me 4 pi over 3. And what I would figure out is that 10 pi over 3 is coterminal to 4 pi over 3, meaning it is actually in the same location. Therefore, all the 6 trigonometric functions should be based on this point. So the cosine of 10 pi over 3 is the same as the cosine of 4 pi over 3 due to coterminality. Therefore, it would be minus 1 half, and so on. But let us move on to the last point in, actually this was in 4.1, so we've kind of been 4.2 going back to 4.1 now. But I wanted to describe what does radians mean, what does degrees mean, and the relationship between this, because that's another notoriously confusing thing, which is actually pretty simple. And I will go back to the slides for this because I have some fancy stuff in here. So notice how the way that I defined the trigonometric functions was based on the relationship between t, the distance to the terminal point, and the point itself. But another way, instead of using the correspondence between uh, how far I've traveled, like the ant walking along the circle, we can use angle measurement instead, and trigonometric functions can, instead of being defined sine of t, can be based on sine of theta, which is a much more common way you'll see trigonometric functions. But it's really the same thing. It's just instead of using those radian measurements, we're using degree measurements instead.